Yes, what has happened is actually it's increasingly moved. The national scenario has increasingly moved towards central India. So
Mm.
you have a lot of folk music from UP, Bihar, coming into mainstream Hindi cinema, which is I think good because at one time it was dominated only by Punjabi music and a lot of Sufi music like qawwalis, and even now you see a lot of out of place qawwalis in films. That there is no actually reason for that, but that is also because s- the Indian tradition of telling story in a song
Mm.
increasingly, the filmmakers lost the significance of telling a story in the song. uh, People say that India is a uh, country of rivers and mountains. Some say it's a land of tigers and snakes, and some will say it's a land of diversity, and we have a lot of unity in that diversity. But if you ask me, India is a land of stories and songs, and to tell a story in a song is our national character.
Mm.
It's not by it's not a coincidence that the highest philosophical treatise of this land is called the Bhagavad Gita. It's not a coincidence. It's even mathematics we have taught through poetry and music. So
Yeah.
we see it as uh, poet. Even the playwrights, Kalidas or Bhas, they were called poets. They were not called literateurs or dramatists or anything. They were called poets. Ved Vyas is a poet. Mahabharat is in poetry. So we tend to tell our stories in a song. Secondly, the type of story that we are telling is not a linear story like one begins at once upon a time and then ends at and they lived happily ever after. We move around in circles, and avartan is our soul of our storytelling.
Mm.
So you see Panchatantra or you see Katha Sarit Sagar, we we ascribe to a very circular sort of uh, storytelling because that's the entire philosophy. We don't believe that a person begins his journey from birth and then ends at death. No, then it's again a circle. So that circular form of music also is now increasingly getting lost because you are telling linear stories. So you are not telling actually the in 90s, if you see the films, the songs were just spaces of rest. In a David Dhawan film, the song had no bearing on the story. So it was just a 5 minute rest from the story. That's now as stories went on to shifted to the Mofussil from centers of urban centers like Mumbai. Actually, what the shift was not just from urban centers. The shift was from generalization to the specific. So now we have a story set in Bareilly. Otherwise, there was some Ramgarh, which
Hmm.
was a fictional town, and then they could take a lot of artistic liberty and speak any kind of language. So uh, now they are zeroing in on which dialect the characters will speak. So the songs may come from that dialect. So that's I think a very welcome approach.
Mm.
Uh, but as Nivedita ji was saying that you know that taking the soul from Western type of storytelling and then infusing it into our small towns, and it sometimes it becomes so morose and so far away removed from reality that you develop sort of a uh, you, you know it's something repels you
Yes.
from accepting that story. So that is what happens. So increasingly characters stories, especially on OTT platforms, and for the precise reason that Nivedita ji gave, they started becoming more and more repulsive. So what is welcome is you take story to specific town. The more specific you are, the more universal you become. That is an essential truth of storytelling.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
but yeah, but if if that is lost, and then you infuse the characters as if it's speaking in a say Avadhi dialect, but the character has nothing to do with the personality of an Avadhi fellow, then it again you are stuck in sort of a schizophrenic space, that you don't actually know what the character is talking about and who he is talking about.
Yeah.
Secondly, whose stories are you telling? That becomes a very, now for example, i I had almost written an article on films of Vishal Bharadwaj, because very interesting. I had named the article as "To Be or Not to Be Vishal Bharadwaj." The reason is, see, when you adapt, for example, and I think he did a very good job as far as the as far as the device is concerned of telling that story. But for example, take Othello or Omkara. Now, Othello was a king. Okay, he was a righteous king. He had the sort of you know a legal standpoint of ruling that country. Okay, and he's the perfect person. He's perfect in all other aspects. He is brave, he is courageous, he is loyal, he stands by his subjects, but he is not good looking, and he loves Desdemona, and that love turns into extreme possessiveness, that he starts not only doubting Desdemona, he starts doubting himself, and it leads to disaster, and that is a tragedy. But it remains, the truth remains, that Othello was a king, and the power to vested in him was legitimate. Okay. Now take Omkara. Omkara is a Bahubali's right hand man, or is a Bahubali himself. So the power vested in him itself is illegal. It's illegitimate. So he has other cracks in his personality already. So who cares whether he loves Dolly or he doesn't, or that those cracks are bound to show. That it does not become the story of a strong person. It does not become a story of a person whose story you would care to hear. The same thing about Makbul. So any legitimate uh, character turns illegitimate in Vishal Bharadwaj's film. So the the dialogues are good, the storytelling is very nice, but who are you actually? The soul of that story is lost, because Macbeth was a courageous man, and he was actually the right hand of the king. So the power vested in him was legitimate. Same thing, and it turned worse in Hyder. That slowly you started. sympathizing with terror apologists and terrorists eventually. So it's bound to go in that way.
Yeah.
It's bound to go. It's sort of destined that that what type of a story you will tell will become worse. And very interesting thing. In Makbul, I don't remember in Omkar, I don't think it is there, but in Makbul and in Haider, there is one thing common. The character with whom the audience should sympathize sings Gulo Mein Rang Bhare, Faiz Ahmad Faiz poem. गुलों में रंग भरे बादे नौ बहार चले. This is a song that in Makbul, the character of Pankaj Kapoor sings, who is murdered. So the audience feels for him, or should feel, that he was murdered, and he was murdered unfairly. Okay, he was, the treatment meted out to him was unfair. Same thing in Haider. The father of Haider sings this song. So this is where Oscar Wilde says that to reveal art and conceal the artist, that is art saying. But this is where the filmmaker reveals himself, because that Gulo Mein Rang Bhare is not being sung by the characters, it's being sung by the filmmaker. That's his position. That's how you know that who he's sympathizing with. And it might have been done knowingly or unknowingly, who knows. But that is how storytelling has varied, even if it went to the specifics. So Haider did go to Kashmir. Omkara did go to the heartland of UP. Makbul did address the question of the Muslim gangsters or gangster families. But eventually what matters is whose story you tell and what is the value that you add once the film or the story is over. So that is the question that is remains to be answered. So going to specific uh, regions is most welcome, but are you telling the story of that region honestly is another important part that you have to see.
Right.
Is yeah,
So
yeah.
I think
Sorry.
Yeah, go
no,
ahead,
no, no,
please.
please, Kaushal ji,
Yeah,
please carry
no,
on.
no, just one line to end some of this, that you can't, you can give the language, the uh, uh, the sets, the art direction, the costumes of a particular character. But if that soul from that character is removed, or you try to infuse a foreign soul in that, then the story does not remain genuine. It remains very superficial, and it does not really tell you anything about, and it doesn't stay with you. That is